The Ribera Valley covers an area of 22,500 kilometers squared over the states of São Paulo and Paraná in southeastern Brazil. It extends 500 kilometers along the Ribera de Iguape River, from the headwaters on the slopes of the Serra do Mar mountain range to the mouth of the river at Iguape and into the Atlantic Ocean, forming a natural corridor linking the continent to the coast. The region contains the largest remains of the Atlantic rainforest, which once covered an area of 1,300,000 kilometers squared before the colonization period, but since has been reduced to only 8% of that figure. The Atlantic rainforest is a hotspot for biodiversity. Despite being a fraction of the size of the Amazon, both forests harbour a similar range of different species. The Atlantic forest containing 5% of the species of vertebrae on Earth and 8% of the plant species, many of which are endemic to the forest. It is therefore an area of major ecological concern for conservation. Although the valley is rich in natural resources, the residing people have the lowest levels of income and literacy in the São Paulo state. The valley also has the lowest population density and growth rates in the state, with a high proportion of people living in rural areas, between 35 and 51% compared to the country average of 15%. The population is made up of several different social groups, reflecting the complex history of human occupation in the region. The main different groups include Amerindians, Caiçaras, Caipiras, and Quilombos. Amerindians are the indigenous inhabitants of the region before European settlers. There are around 70 Amerindian reserves in the valley, the Guarani being the major group, living in scattered communities along the coast. Quilombos are rural communities of African heritage. Their people are descendants of Maroons, that is, slaves who escaped their owners during the colonization period. There are around 370 Quilombo settlements dispersed across the valley in remote locations. Their livelihoods are based on subsistence agriculture, and their culture and traditions are strongly tied to the past. Caiçaras and Caipiras are populations descending from Portuguese, Amerindians, and African Brazilians. Caiçaras live on the coast, and their livelihoods depend mainly on maritime and natural resources. Caipiras live in the interior and are usually smallholders, living in rural villages with closer links to urban centres. There are numerous larger settlements in the valley with relatively high populations, including towns Apai, Ipiranga and Registro, with populations of 4, 24 and 56,000 respectively. The valley was one of the first regions in the country to be colonized, due to gold being discovered near the headwaters of the Ribera River at the end of the 16th century. The mines were largely powered by enslaved African and indigenous peoples in the 17th and 18th centuries. However, by the end of the 18th century, the mines became exhausted and were abandoned. Slave owners who remained in the valley began to shift investment of resources into commercial rice production, which became the defining industry of the 19th century. From 1930 onwards, banana cultivation began to replace the plantation areas of rice. Then, in the 1950s and 60s, extractive industries of wood and palmito gained great economic importance. The region had a new impetus. An effort to conserve the largest remains of the Atlantic forest also began in the 1950s. Overnight, the State Park of Batar and environmental conservation areas were established. The land was considered unclaimed and therefore suitable for the creation of parks. However, much of the area was inhabited by local communities. The conservation units forbade residents to use the land for any agricultural or extractive purposes, effectively stripping many settlers of their livelihoods and making them invaders on their own land. The State Park of Batar is located between the towns of Apai and Ipiranga, covering an area of 35,700 hectares. The landscape consists of dramatic rainforest covering mountainous terrain, with 300 caves and many waterfalls. Policymakers have framed ecotourism in the park as a solution to sustainable development, yet in reality, few individuals have managed to take advantage of these opportunities. Today, there is still much uncertainty surrounding conservation and development in the valley. There is a lack of knowledge of what is needed by communities for the improvement of environmental and economic conditions. One of the most contentious socio-economic matters of recent times is the Sao Paulo government's call for the concession of Pitar to international investors for a period of 30 years. The government claims the objectives of the concession are to gain investment for the conservation, operation and maintenance of the park by the private sector. However, under the concession, many local people have concerns about the future of Pitar, and the Pitar Without Concession movement has been formed to oppose the bid.